and go long here. So we go short and da-da, and short phrase, and then this one feels like it's going to be short, but carry it a little longer, and that gives us our direction. 3 shorts in a row gets to be too much. Certainly 4 does. So short, short, long. It's kind of a typical pattern. And even if the composer doesn't indicate, or the editor doesn't indicate short, short, long in the slurring, we still understand that aspect of holding back, and let it roll forward. Gives a beautiful balance. Let's see what we have here for our next segment. And what do we notice of these pitches? Then it's imitated in the left hand. So it's actually a direct imitation. So let's bring that out. Now let's exaggerate it on the repeat. So we have here maybe da da yada ba ba da da. Right voice and left hand voice. Then back to our opening. So play with your balance between the hands, balance between the voices. And when we have this situation right here, we got this long leap, students tend to go like this and then have to stop and move. But let the hand turn up here so we can rotate to that top. And notice here we'll drag the 4, 5, 1. Let's go next, shall we, to our Beethoven Für Elise. Let's take a look there, shall we? We all know the score, so instead of showing score on this one, what I'd like to do is bring a close-up on the screen, and you might have a score of your own you can be utilizing as needed. Let's take a look from overhead and look at the harmony. We're in the key of A minor, so we're going to have, of course, our 5, 7, and our 1. And indeed, pitch 5 and pitch 1. So it's no surprise that we start out with 5 and an embellishment to 5. And what I like to do there in our addition, I go 5, 3, which is a wonderful trill fingering, right? If you have to trill with 5, 5, 3 is easier than 4. But it also lets us then go to 4 next. So you get 3 and then the 4. So the pickup, 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1, that pickup is done with finger 3, and then you're under the hand with 4. Works out beautifully for the number of counts of how many iterations. So what do we have so far? We have 1 and then 5, 7 and 1 and back to 5, 1, 5, 1. So just that stepping up. We have 5, 1, 5, 7, 1, 5, 1, 5, 7, 1. Let's hear it now as we play. And now what happens? And back. So here we have step 3 in major, 1, 5, 7, back to 1 and 5, 7. So notice we have this pairing of 1 and 5, 7 in major and 1 and 5, 7 in minor. I want to highlight that because how would we do this for our students? Is there a way that we can make this explicit for our students in an important way? Well, if we come back to our teacher atlas here, what if we went into our scale book here instead? Our scale book. Let's go to our scale book of level 3. So I'm going to go back into our technique page here. Sorry. I'm sorry, we were in technique and artistry. And instead of the literature books, I'm going to go to our scale book 3. And at the end of scale book 3 is this great exercise which you could use as a presentation on harmony. So let's go with our, here's our scale book 3, and we're going to go all the way here to near the end of the book. Let's just run through the idea of taking a major chord in its 5/7 and then a minor in its 5/7 is what I find really intriguing here. So this is our harmony section, and notice we have these chord drills going through diatonic harmony. And as we move through this section and working with these chord patterns, we give a workout on 1, 5, 7 and so on, and then various chord progressions, all with transpositions. This is an incredibly powerful workout for the student. So here on this last page of the book, notice this little grid. We have the major one and its 5/7, but then the relative minor and its 5/7. Then we put that through different keys, 1 and 5/7 in G, and the 1 and 5/7 of the relative minor. So what you can do on this is not only the exercise and taking that through all keys, but what you could do is take this sort of a grid of a tic-tac-toe sign, and you could actually draw that with the students. In other words, we could say, put a little whiteboard up here, and we could draw our 1 and 5/7. We're going to make it crisscross here with tic-tac-toe. And then, so what's the, we have a 1 chord here, don't we? Let me get rid of our arrows. There we go. So let's just say we're in the key of D major. Okay, so D is the 1, so I'm going to put 1 is D. What's our 5/7? A7. So we mark that as 5/7. And then relative minor, what's relative minor of D? B minor, so we have a B minor. And it's 5/7, and that of course is F#7. So if you get used to doing this, you can do it right on the student's score, then you have some real predictability. In other words, if we go back then to our Beethoven, and we look at that opening of the score of the Beethoven, we see it's in A minor, we can draw that tic-tac-toe sign, and we can put C in G7, A minor and E7, and sure enough, that's what we have. Our A minor, 1 and 5/7, and then 1, 5/7, and back to 1 and 5/7. So what do we have for our B section? And what key are we in here? Let's take a little close up at the keyboard. Here we're a third away instead of a third up to our relative major. We're a third down to the F major, right? So we're on step 6. And so forth. Now, of course, the problem passage for students is this. Let's just use a little rotation here. And then we get our circle. So rotate. And here you can think of this is note what finger? 1, 3, 2, 1. 1, 3, 2, and so forth. So if you note the finger that's playing, that can sometimes be very helpful. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 3. And of course the harmony here is 4, 5, 1, 4, 5, and then to the 5, 7 of A. How about here? Maybe we bring out some inner voices. Here we have to change pedal so this A clears. Here we can delay the pedal, so we can almost overlap. In other words, you don't always have to totally clean pedal here. Here, notice here, I'm going to give us an overhead shot. I'm just dragging that lower A for more resonance. So, maybe a little more subtle here on the final time. And maybe a different voicing. Here, E. And here, drag that E of the D so that that seventh can drag through a bit. So I do some dragging of fingers here to get a finger pedal, especially pedal and change. Here we change for the rest, but we still have a pedaled effect because I'm dragging that lower A. And here, E, make that an octave, a melodic octave. And here's again, dragging that seventh through. I hope that gives you some thoughts or some ideas in teaching the piece to help bring it alive and help execute the passages that may be difficult for students. Well, let's shift gears now. It's my pleasure here to bring in David Andrus. You may recall when we were talking over the last few days, we introduced the concept of, for remote teaching, what's stable in our lives, even though we may be teaching distance. We said student is stable because they're practicing in their home. So we're just reaching out to teach in their home, but that's not so different for the student because the learning is happening in their home anyway. And in our teaching, we said there were three sorts of interactions we have. We have a presentation of concepts. That's providing a model, much like we did here. I'm sharing some models with you and with students. But then there's also the dialogue. That's the conversation we have with students, more back and forth, which we weren't able to have today, but we'll bring that in with questions and answers later. And then the other is feedback, giving that very rapid, if possible, feedback on the student's performance. And what that does is provides the repetition of the practice to make the structural changes in the neurology. So that repetition is done correctly because the feedback drives the student to being correct. So with David here, he's going to share with us a presentation on Beethoven created by David Andrus and Marion Usler. Hi, Marion. I hope you're with us there from California. We're inviting now David in from Germany to show what we can present whether we're in person with a class or one-to-one, or whether you're online. This is a great presentation tool you can use in your remote teaching. David.
So, can you see me?
I see you.
All right. Great to join you. It looks like we have the same background wall color. This is fantastic. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to announce this or to tell you about this new site. It's all about Beethoven, and it's all about online learning and a way for you teachers to help your students get interested in Beethoven, in his music, in his life in general. Just as an introduction, we might have asked the question, why do a site on Beethoven? There's so much information out there. And just to give you an example, I've got my Groves dictionary right here. Yeah. And this is the article on Beethoven. It's over 60 pages long with really, really, really small, fine text. So, I mean, there is so much information out there. We could send students right to Groves or right to the Wikipedia site on Beethoven, but they would be totally overwhelmed. And that's the reason we decided to do this site, to give students something they can digest bits at a time. And what we've turned up with is this, this site. Let me share my screen just a second. Here. And many, many thanks to Marianne Usler for her wonderful writing, which is so clear in all of this. And this site has now become sort of a conglomeration of stories about Beethoven's life. You'll see there are 8 biographical stories with search and discover activities. And just want to explain a little bit how this is organized. The stories themselves are a little bit in storybook mode. If I go over and click here on story 1, I'll see a story with images to support the whole thing. And I can go through here and read the entire story. We could assign this to students to do this on their own, read through the story, and set up a discussion time the next lesson. And this, I won't take you through the entire thing. What does happen towards the end is that you'll see there is a featured recording of a piece at the end of each story. And this here is the Bonn Sonata, one of Beethoven's earliest sonatas that he composed when he was just a young boy, 12 years old. The sonatas he composed while he was still in Bonn. That's why we call them the Bonn Sonatas in English. They're called the Kurfürstsonaten in German. And so you can click on this recording and listen to it. And we've included also some suggestions about what to listen for. So it's always an attempt to help students learn what to listen for, to get them interested in the music just even before they listen the first time. And so we could imagine this would be a wonderful way to get students interested in Beethoven's music. And not just his piano music. We have included recordings that are available on YouTube from symphonies, from canons, from silly pieces, from very long and intense pieces, and very short pieces. So it's a real combination of everything that Beethoven did, which is always helpful because even as pianists, we want to learn about the entire composer. And the more we learn about his entire spectrum of composing, the more we understand his music as pianists as well. So these stories, there are 8 of them. Let me go back to the menu. You'll see they're not all available yet. Right now, the first story is available. These will be released in a 2-week cycle. So 2 weeks later, you'll see story 2, and another 2 weeks later, you'll see story 3, etc., etc. When story 8 comes out, the week after that will be Beethoven's actual 250th birthday. So this is, in a way, a lead up to the 250th birthday celebration of Beethoven. Officially December 17th, although that date is the date of his baptism. So he may have been born a day before, maybe 2 days before, but the date of the baptism was the date that was usually recorded in the records. So we celebrate his birthday on December 17th. So we hope this will be a great tool for you and for students to learn more about Beethoven in a digestible way. And in order to, let's say, going back to what Randy was talking about on Wednesday, about the learning theory, about the brain, the open brain with, or the coffee cup that was overflowing in information. The Groves article, of course, would just overflow. It would be too much information. Everybody would be overwhelmed. And we as authors were sometimes even overwhelmed. We've been reading through Beethoven biographies, through articles like this, and trying to condense it into digestible sections, pardon me. And what we've done then is to take a lot of this information and put it into a so-called search and discover section. At the end of each story, you'll see a search and discover section, which takes students through various things dealing with that particular story that were relevant to Beethoven's life. Here you'll see information about the Rhine River. And we have really scoured the internet for interesting links that are informative, and I guess informative is the best word to use, about all of these things. So here is one, a video about the Rhine River. Well, you'll learn a lot of information about the Rhine River and its history through watching this little short video from someone you may have heard of if you're interested in European travel, for example. Or here, the Beethoven House itself. It so happens that this house where Beethoven was born is the only house that they lived in that is still existent today, and it's now the Beethoven House Museum in Bonn. And we're very thankful to them for offering us the ability to use a wide amounts of their archives for this site. So you will often find things from this Beethoven House here on this site that we can link to show you what Beethoven's life looked like. For example, this painting that Beethoven took with him to every single place he ever lived. This painting of his grandfather. He didn't know his grandfather. He was very young when his grandfather died, but he took this painting everywhere he went. So lots of little interesting tidbits about Beethoven's life that you might not have known had you not done a lot of research. For example, here is the console of the organ that Beethoven played on when he was 11 years old. He acted as an assistant to Christian Gottlob Neefe, his teacher, playing the organ at church services in the city of Bonn. And this organ console was preserved by the Beethoven House in Bonn and restored to its original condition in, I think, the 1980s. So you can see pictures of these things as well. And at the end of this entire section, you will also find a whole section, which is sort of hidden in the footnote, full of recordings. All of these little buttons are recordings. The whole idea is to have students take a look at Beethoven, what piques their interest, and just click and discover. So here, a first. This is Beethoven's very first published piece. So you can read a little bit about the piece, you can find out what it's about, and you click on the recording, then you'll see a recording of the piece with some extra questions to think about. So these are all little assignments you can give to students. You can talk with your students about these online. There are many ways that you could possibly use this. I think Randy and Landon, it would be great to have a little conversation about this, about ways that this could be used online. You'll see also in these other buttons in the first chapter and the second chapter, you'll see the pieces that Randolph Faber has been mentioning in these last webinars. The Russian folk dance, the Écossais, the German dances. And we've included 2 recordings of each, one of Dr. Faber's, one of mine, which are quite different in character, just to give students an idea of what the possibilities are in these various recordings. One other thing we've tried to do as much as possible is to provide recordings that show the score, like these. So you'll see the score. Or recordings that really show what's happening when it's being performed. So, and you'll notice as the first question of tempo. There's quite a few different tempi that one could take. This will open up the possibility for conversation with your students about these kinds of issues. We have included also recordings of orchestra, symphonies, and in this case, German dances performed by an incredible Viennese quartet in the old Viennese style. You just have to hear 8 measures to hear this Viennese style of playing waltzes. You hear their own swing. Beethoven lived in the time in Vienna when the whole waltz was becoming popular, and this Viennese lilt is so typical of the Viennese waltz. Just one example of how listening to music that's not piano related can help piano students to understand Beethoven's music better. Basically, that's really all I have to say about the site right now. It's just a site for you to dig into as much as you want, to take a look, to learn about Beethoven. If you're too busy to do the whole thing right now, you just wait and go back to a link later. You could assign individual elements of this to your students, one per day, one per week, and then do little group sessions with your students to listen to the pieces or to talk about pieces that you've listened to. One idea would also be, for example, in a group session, if you set up a group session with your students, you could talk about one of these pieces. Yep. Get them ready to listen to it. Ask them some questions, tell them what to listen to, and then each student can listen on their own, so they all have their best audio quality possible. And after 5 minutes, you could get back online and discuss it. Or you could do it as I'm doing now, which was sharing my computer sound. Now, I'm not sure if the sound was really good for everybody. And that's why there's no really complete optimal way to use this site for every single user. But those are just some ideas of how to do it. I was a judge in an online competition this year after the COVID situation. The competition was about to be canceled, but they decided to do everything online. So people submitted their recordings, and we jury members got together, discussed everything beforehand, and said, okay, we're now going to listen to this category to every competition participant, and in 2 hours we'll get back online and discuss everything. We had sheets ready to mark down our notes, and we got back online after 2 hours, and it was amazing to see that this actually works. So just some suggestions for you. I'd leave it at that for now and open up to questions.
Great, David. Thank you so much. Well, we're posing some questions here to all of our guests today. I just want to highlight that search and discovery section. You know, when we were talking about modes of interaction with the students, we talked about presentation, and this being a presentation tool. But a presentation tool that allows a student then to go forward on their own volition and explore. It's kind of like our exploration with a student in presentation mode is the training wheels to have the student take it to the deeper learning. And that reflects back to what we talked about last session of passive learning versus active learning. This is designed for active learning, not for passive learning.
Yes, exactly. That was the whole idea, was to create something where students can really dive in as they need. You know, there's the expression to go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, is that a good thing or a bad thing? But we said like it's a good thing, right?
We've created quite a few Beethoven rabbit holes.
We're mixing metaphors nicely, but I like that. Some of you have read some of the things I've written about curiosity, curiouser and curiouser, or some lectures on that. The adventure is all about curiosity. But in order to engage the student, this first step is we need to be engaging their curiosity, right? So here, if they can be at least a little curious about hearing Beethoven, then we can become more curious about Beethoven. Pretty soon you're curiouser and curiouser, and before you know it, you're in the rabbit hole. And that's what we want, because that's the intrinsic motivation of self-motivated learning.
And for me as a co-author, um, I mean, I actually love now reading this Groves article about Beethoven.
Oh, yeah. That's a big rabbit hole.
It is. Um, and like I said, many thanks to Marianne Usler.
Yeah, Marian, are you on here? We just want to give a hello and a thank you for your tremendous amount of work on this. We've always loved our collaborations with you. Marian Usler in Los Angeles. Many of you know her from the so many piano publications. She was the chief editor for Piano Quarterly and Keyboard Companion and so forth. And we teamed up with her years ago where she helped us with our Piano Adventures newsletter in the early days. And she continues to be a wonderful mind and a wonderful resource. Thank you, Marianne.
And a wonderful editor and author of texts that are concise and they don't go on too long. I tend to be too wordy, but Marianne knows how to get things down to the nitty gritty and make it just interesting and not too long. So
Yeah.
it's been a great
Speaking of long, one of the questions I see is how long did it take to develop this incredible course? Thank you for that. I'm curious. It says, I love your curiosity.
Well,
And what do you think, David? That's a, you
it's now,
answer that better than me.
yeah, it's now 2020, and Marianne approached me with the idea almost 2 years ago, in 2018. We discussed it a couple of times in the beginning of 2018. We started working on a prototype early 2019. And approached you and Nancy with the idea then in 2019, I think May or so, and have been working on it ever since, trying to perfect it and get it ready for publication.
We want to give a thanks also to the rest of the team, John Uphoff for his production direction as director of production, and then also to Jeff on the programming side and to our artists and so forth. It was a great collaborative work. And David, can you tell us a little bit about the fact that there's the 8 stories, and so what's available now and what's forthcoming?
Okay, well, these 8 stories will take you, let me share my screen once again, just a second. Here we go. These will take you through Beethoven's life, Haydn 8 Groschen. That's German, of course. That's a quote from Beethoven. That's the price of one of Haydn's lessons. How much a lesson with Haydn cost. Free and Equal is all about Beethoven and his love of the idea of independence. If you begin to think about Beethoven's life, I mean, he was born in 1770. The United States Declaration of Independence was, I'm sorry, 1770. 1776 was the Declaration of Independence. 1789, the French Revolution. These things were happening as Beethoven was a young boy and a young man. And he was enthralled with this idea that we don't need to be enslaved to the upper class anymore. He was an artist, and he insisted on being an artist and being treated equally as anybody else in the upper class. And these kinds of ideas are all over the place in his music. And so this chapter is all about that. Good and bad has to deal with things that were going well for him and things that weren't going so well. We know when he turned 30 or so, he realized he was losing his hearing. Ideas. It goes on. The country man. We know that Beethoven loved his country walks. He had a pretty specific routine. He would compose in the morning. He would go for long walks in the forest in the afternoon, and settle down at the pub in the evening. And that was his daily life. So we get into things about that as well, and about his approach to music at the end, leading into the Romantic period, away from the old classical style. And of course, at the end, dealing with the end of his life, his difficulties, the circumstances of his death, etc.
So as we walk through that, you know, his birthday is in December.
Right.
Am I correct on that, David? And so we're walking towards that actual 250th birthday. Exactly. And pacing accordingly to let these stories unfold.
The story would be published, if I remember correctly, the week before Beethoven's 250th birthday. So this will take us... Oh dear. My iPad just answered me as if I spoke to her.
We wanted to hear Syrian and German, David.
Yeah, that's it. She said, Guten Tag, was gibt es? Which means, what's happening?
What's happening? Hey, David, while we've got you here, für Elisa,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit, give us a great German pronunciation of that, because we hear so many students and teachers too, we say für Elisa so easily, but of course it's für Elisa. Tell us a little background on that and give us a great pronunciation.
So, für Elise. The S in German is pronounced like a Z in English. So a voiced S, Elise, Elise. And you always pronounce the last vowel as well, the E. Für Elise.
So we have the S as a Z, Elisa, and the F as a V. So it's für Elisa.
Elise. Yeah. And the at the end isn't quite Elisa, but Elise.
Oh, right, soft, Elisa. Okay, thank you. Well, I'll get that right now, and we can be
Yeah.
correct for our students.
And Rand, you mentioned something about or someone, I saw a comment about how to get the right amount of repetitions.
Yes.
How many are there? How many? This is just going on forever and ever. Um, can I just offer one suggestion for that?
Sure, go for it.
If you're listening to the recording, you can go to your recording on the Technique and Artistry site. While listening to the recording, if you get students to tap the 3/8 rhythm, and let me move this back so you can see. This is something that I've done with students many, many, many times, and it works so well. Just get them to tap 1 is the heavy beat, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1. And if you do this the whole way through, even when you get to that section, yum, da 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 dee da da ba ba da 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 dee 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 dee, then it makes sense. It's not about counting, it's not about memorizing it in your head, it's about feeling the beat. And it works so well.
That's great, David. Thank you so much. Hey, let's open up to some general questions from our guests, shall we? Let's go back to an unshared screen, and we'll see if we can view our participants and the participants.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot to turn off my shared screen.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I'm seeing some more in our chat line. What questions do you have for David or myself? And we can open this generally here for a little bit because we've got another 10 minutes left.
Randy and David, I am seeing in the Q&A section, somebody's asked, Christina Tio has asked another question for Lisa. Should the melody of the resolve of the A section be E, C, B, A, or D, C, B, A? The Henley text apparently has different versions. Any clarity on that?
Yeah, there was originally, there's some scores with just the E, but his first published edition had the D. And that D with the seventh is more satisfying because it gives the resolution to the sixth at the end. So in our edited edition, we put the D. But I would have no problem at all if you like to use an E and save the D for the last presentation. That would be very nice. David, do you have thoughts on that?
Basically the same. I've seen both versions, but the Henley text, at least the most modern version, does have the D in there.
And the Breithoff and Hartel, I think, it was published with a D in Beethoven's lifetime, so we know Beethoven approved on that. It's just more satisfying for the resolution. But use E if you like for some of the early presentations, but then bring in the D either on the repeats or on your final presentation. Hey, Marianne, thanks for joining.
Hi.
Yes, hi, Marianne.
Hi there. I finally found how to work all my buttons here at this end. So
That's great. You got an impressive setup behind you.
just sheltering at home. I think one thing I saw there were a couple of questions of the age level for this. We really designed this for what we thought of as sonatina level kids. So, approximately 10 to 12, something along in there. And that is why why it's written as it's written. On the other hand, we've had responses from adults who are sometimes just as interested in this as younger people are. And we realize that the reading level of your students is going to be across the board. Some will read slower, some will read faster. So we try to get a kind of median level so that it really would be available, that they could do a lot of this themselves, and they feel very comfortable working on all of these devices, probably far more comfortable than we do.
Yes.
Certainly myself.
Very good point. Thank you, Marianne. We take a broad view, looking at everything we talked about for the last 3 days. We were trying to marry together our focus and our respect and honoring Beethoven, and that way using Beethoven repertoire as an example of playing out ideas for remote teaching. And just to kind of recap some of those thoughts, especially for those who haven't been with us in the first 2 sessions, we identified that when we're in this pandemic where we can't be physically present with the students, we should take that as an opportunity to explore, to be adventurous, and maybe do things a little differently. Because the important things we reiterated was that keep the student practicing, right? As long as the student's practicing, we have progress going on. So keep that as your number one objective. And then along with that, give the students plenty of music so they have plenty to churn through and to work through. That's what keeps them practicing. And finally, be present. Communicate with the student. And this means that we don't have to do the 1-hour lesson or even a 30-minute lesson. We could take a class lesson where you're talking to kids in a group and a couple times a week. Several touch points can be really helpful. So we encourage you to explore a little bit for whatever works for your style. You could even set up a little phone call with the student for 10 minutes each week, and then followed by a feedback session where you're on Skype, and then maybe a studio class where you do a presentation like working through the Beethoven with all of the students. It doesn't have to be by the clock, that 45 minutes per week or so on. You're putting in preparation time, multiple touch points, letting that student keep practicing, and then you're doing your duty as a teacher, and you can charge your appropriate tuition.
There were a few questions. A couple of people were asking, yes, this website is free.
Yeah.
So we just want to iterate that again. And a few people asked also if we get into a more difficult and challenging repertoire like the sonatas. Yes, we do. So that as the stories go on, some of the music definitely becomes more challenging, but there's always something that there are shorter things, more challenging things, longer things, shorter things, so that there's a sampling of things, but they definitely will be introduced to some of the major works of Beethoven, both for piano and for other instrumentation, including orchestra.
For example, we've got a recording of Yu Zhou Wang playing the Hammerklavier Sonata live, the entire thing, in a later story. There is another recording of Rudolf Buchbinder playing the Opus 2 number 1, if I'm not mistaken. And
Christian Zimmermann playing the Pathétique.
Yes. So really, there are wonderful, wonderful recordings. Like I said, we have scoured the internet for resources that are available, and we've done the decision making for you in advance in order that you don't get lost on the way.
And we have some songs by Beethoven, some marches, some canons that he's written. So there's a great selection of things that maybe even a little unfamiliar to some teachers. Mm-hmm. They certainly were unfamiliar to me until I started looking into them.
We found out things about, for example, this Russian dance was originally written as a set of variations for piano and violin. Little details like that will come out in this whole Search and Discover section.
That's great. It's amazing how many of these little teaching pieces we have might have been, had a different setting just for, string duets and so forth, and then pulled in and published for piano, because that gave some elementary repertoire for the students. So it was very functional that way, but not originally written for the piano. And yet it can be considered authentic, classical keyboard repertoire because it was published in Beethoven's lifetime as a little teaching piece.
Yes. And one of the pieces was even written for military band, and the original score was lost. But apparently, Beethoven's student, Czarny, wrote down piano version that we now know.
Oh, yeah. What would we do without Jerry?
Oh, yeah. It's amazing, all these details. So there have been quite a few questions about the website name.
Yes. Go ahead, David.
Beethoven.pianoadventures.com.
You might think of this as the dot. In other words, we're at Piano Adventures, but because it's a big chunk of a site, Beethoven.pianoadventures.com. And similarly, if you go to the Piano Adventures Teacher Atlas, go to cloud.pianoadventures.com. Because all of those books, all of that resources is in the cloud for your access. So we have it on our site, cloud.pianoadventures.com, Beethoven.pianoadventures.com. And then for the technique and artistry videos, which by the way, you can share those through our student link function. You can share those with your students. So you can give them a video to observe, and that's faberpiano.com, faberpiano.com. You'll see a link to it right off the home page of the Teacher Atlas, and we're working on making the quick links between them a little more accessible for you.
And we have some kind of fun things on there too, like how strudel is made. What kind of pencils? What did Beethoven probably put in his pockets? Where did the pencils come from? I mean, the things that that will interest some kids that are not necessarily directly reflective of Beethoven, but certainly of the times in which Beethoven lived, that kind of clues them in for the feeling of the time and the place, what kind of clothes they wore in those days, that sort of thing. So it speaks to different interests for different people.
All right, let's bring in Landon a minute. Landon, you want to come on? You've been watching through the participants in the chat, and maybe you've got a little something where you want to highlight a question or anybody to come in before we close today.
Yeah, sure. Well, there was one question that I found interesting, and I know that I had discussed this a little bit briefly with David yesterday in a private conversation, but the difference in the approach that a true German pianist might take in fingering, right? And David laughs because he's actually not a true German. He's from San Diego, California, but nobody's giving that info out. The idea that with a repeated kind of gesture, repeated notes, in Germany, it might be taught a certain way. In America, it might be taught a lot more flexibly. And that was a question that somebody had raised. Why the difference and why the importance? Where does that come from?
Okay, that comes from the original instruments. Instruments in Beethoven's time didn't have the action that we have now that allow a note to repeat without taking it up all the way. Can you see the key? Just a second.
Yeah.
If I play this note, I let the key up halfway and can still play it again. This double escapement action. In Beethoven's time, this wasn't available. In order to play the key again, the key had to be totally released and then played again. And if you were doing this with one finger, you might not get the second sound. The second strike might not sound. And that's why they insisted on changing fingers. So if you take the Russian dance, you would see a fingering more like this. Yeah, 4, 3, 2, just changing every single time, just to be sure that that key would sound. That's the reason, the original reason for these finger changes on repeated notes. And it's not necessary on modern instruments because we can do that just as well with one finger. We can do it with a half depressed key. But if you do that and you start experimenting with that, it sort of changes the sound, the character of the piece. And just, I can speak from my own experience, it makes it more fun to play. That's all.
That's interesting because I just know from my experience, performing the Appassionata Sonata. There's that, famous kind of pedal tone,
Oh, yeah.
low, low on the piano, those triplet C's, and they're marked like pianissimo or something.
Yeah.
And so I've been advised both ways that you can actually get a more kind of atmospheric, mysterious sound with using the single finger and really utilizing that double escapement, versus the more traditional approach of changing fingering maybe gets you a bit of a noisier sound.
I think that's a good point, Landon. Which sound you want?
Yeah.
Certainly, if you use a single finger and you're staying, you don't let the key come all the way up. Then you never fight the damper. Then your damper is off the whole time, which keeps it open, and so you essentially have the assistance of that pedaling, you might say.
Right. It's like a pedal tone.
Exactly. Yeah. It is a pedal tone, so it makes it sound like it's sustaining more. But if you want the sound of that iteration, then your alternating fingers is more percussive.
I do have another question that it wasn't specifically asked in the comments, but it's a question I've pondered myself. I haven't been on the development end of Beethoven Independent Man as a website, and it strikes me when I visit it. One question I have, just as a pianist and as a teacher who's used to paying for resources, why did you guys decide to do this for free? And why are there no ads on the site? I mean, in a sense, it's almost radical in how open and generously available it has been. And I'm just curious if you could provide some insight into what motivated that.
Well, I'll take that question. I guess one is we've been blessed to have support of teachers around the world, and we've been focusing all the time. We put all the publishing money back into resources for teachers. So our whole objective is to support the teachers and support the students. So one, it's a legacy. It's helping the students. To a great degree, too, we decided to make it free because of the coronavirus time, that teachers need tools and presentation tools. We all need assistance right now, so we are working hard, whether it be the upcoming Disney camp, Jazz and Blues camp, processes, presentations that you can use to help enliven your studio and keep your students going. Also, we felt, and David can speak to this, we had tremendous help and resources. David's visited many sites in Europe and taking pictures, and the fact that we had other historians give of their time, we felt the best thing to do then is to make it free, just as others have been free in their caring and their interest in the site.
Awesome. That's so wonderful. There was one other question, and I've seen it pop up a few times, and it might not have an answer immediately, but there is a question out there of, is this something that we might do as a company for other composers in the future? I know it was a massive time investment.
Yeah,
It took a lot of resources.
No, it's a good question, and as long as David and Marion have the energy and we've got the budget, I tell you what, I want to shout out a thank you to our Teacher Atlas subscribers. We had to think, what do we charge for this? We were building the Teacher Atlas, and a lot of programming costs, a lot of money going into it, and yet we wanted to be able to. We needed to keep the flow of energy going, and we wanted to make it readily available. And so the hundreds of subscribers came on right away, and that's been helping fund that. And then that helps fund also the Beethoven Independent Man project. So that's a thank you to those that have gotten with that subscription. And that helps us keep it going. So the degree that we have success with something like that, we can keep our team of programmers going. We'd be delighted to move on to Chopin and so on. I think it's been I don't want to speak for Marion and David, but it's been exciting to work on, and exciting to watch, and exciting to produce. So we're up for it. We're up for the challenge. I did want to just let everyone know regarding the Teacher Atlas also, because September is such a critical month for getting ready for your studio to start. We've opened Technique and Artistry and the Teacher Atlas for free this month, so that whether you want to subscribe to the $10 a month, and you get both for $10, or you can get the Technique and Artistry for $6 a month. But we wanted you at least to be able to get in here for September, so it can help you with your lesson planning, kind of jumpstart things, and you can dig into the hundreds of videos and the resources. And if that's helpful for you, we love that. And so by all means, avail yourself of that at this time.
I would also just add to that, Randy, for those of you who are new to the Teacher Atlas, haven't played around with it, there is a tutorial video that's really simple to go through. It's about 12 minutes long, and it's on the main website. So if you just go to pianoadventures.com/atlas, scroll down a little bit, you'll see a video. It's me, and I walk you through very kind of casually what the site looks like and how to navigate that. So if you have questions or difficulties, take a look there. If not, you can always email me. It's landon@pianoadventures.com.
I can second that, Landon. Even though I'm an experienced web user after all of this work, that video helped me a lot to understand the Atlas and how it all works.
And we're continuing to make improvements on it, so we appreciate you bearing with us. Any little things that aren't always intuitive, like how to get there. But then we are working on more universal login across our apps and all too. Some of you have asked about the sight reading coach when the students are not at the lesson and they need some feedback on their own. Remember, our sight reading books are variations on the lesson book pieces. So the student can have an app that'll give them feedback as they go through daily variations on the lesson book pieces. So that can give you some assistance. And we're continuing to do other refinements and other tools for you. So we'll stay in touch. Please stay in touch with us. We have a new chat feature on pianoadventures.com homepage. You can go right on there and chat, and hopefully we'll have somebody that can get to you right away, if not immediately available. And the discussion forum on technique and artistry, we promise that we'll be watching that, monitoring that. It's not unusual for me to respond to a question by shooting a video on a specific question. And so make yourself, avail yourself of that. If there's some question, you can do it privately or public posting, and we're happy to help in any way we can. Big thank you to Landon for being the host here for the series. And thank you, Marianne and David, for your tremendous hard work. And to John in the background and the rest of the Piano Adventures team, auf Wiedersehen. Thanks, everybody.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Bye now.